Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and in this video we're going to discuss the gameplay mechanic, Poise, from the first Dark Souls game specifically. Why? Because so much of the game can revolve around this one mechanic, and yet it is also one you may ignore entirely if you so choose. First up, if you don't know what Poise is, it was a sub-stat in the first Dark Souls game. Whilst you can increase your primary stats every time you level up in Dark Souls, endurance, strength, dexterity, and so forth, Poise was gained almost exclusively from armor. The premise behind the statistic is that the more poise you have, the less you will react to enemy attacks, in essence. For example, the dagger would inflict 5 points of poise damage, whereas the greatsword would inflict 35 points of poise damage. So if your total poise from all your armor was, say, 20, a single attack from a dagger wouldn't make you flinch at all. You would still take damage, but it would not interrupt your motions in any way, whereas a single greatsword attack would. Meaning poise was effectively the same thing as hyper armor. Several years back I made a starter guide for Dark Souls 1, wherein I suggested visualizing poise as a third meter or bar that was drained by each attack. In this instance, if you had 20 poise and each dagger attack deals 5 poise, you'd be able to take around 4 attacks before you are flinched or staggered. If you're not hit for around 3 seconds, your poise bar will recover to full. Two-handed strikes inflict more poise damage than one-handed. Most every form of damage in the game inflicts poise damage, meaning the stat works against spells too. Enemies have poise as well. According to online data, Stone Guardians and Titanite demons have the highest poise values, set at around 200. No single attack in the game can flinch them. The highest poise attacks for comparison are Sunlight Spear at 120 and most ultra great two-handed attacks at 75. Much like players, the enemies will regenerate poise after not taking any attacks for several seconds. Finally, the word poise itself basically means your balance and composure. So why are we talking about it? Well, poise is in one way the difficulty modifier for Dark Souls. Whilst poise by itself does not reduce the amount of damage you receive, the ability to completely ignore attacks and continue moving is game-changing. This is combined with the fact that poise tends to come from heavy armor, which naturally comes with high defense as a matter of course. The PvP meta in Dark Souls, for example, generally revolved around hitting as much poise as you could while still being able to fast roll. Fast rolls by themselves are of course fantastic. They allow you to iframe straight through an attack and take no damage, at merely the cost of some stamina and a few recovery frames. Whereas poise allows you to walk through an attack, take damage, but have no recovery frames or drawbacks. Simply put, in the first Dark Souls it allowed you to walk through another player's attack, phase through their body, and backstab them. The more you think about it, poise really does control the entire meta of the first Dark Souls. Having enough poise allowed you to remove a huge portion of the game's challenge, as well as being the key stat in PvP. Not only that, but poise was a substantial mechanic in several boss fights. Take Artorias for example. When he is charging up his abyssal aura, his poise is reduced, allowing you to stagger him out of his charging up more easily. Or then you have the Stone Golem, who has a unique poise mechanic. When you've dealt enough damage to his feet and legs, he'll stagger, dealing subsequent damage will then knock him over entirely. This mechanic is unique as it is determined by damage, not poise damage. And the mechanic in general is reminiscent of the Tower Knight, from Demon Souls of course. When I made boss guides for Dark Souls, most of them would point out at times, you don't need to care about your encumbrance, you can simply face tank or poise tank a boss by stacking up poise as high as you can get, with armor such as Havel's or the Stone Guardians. It really does make the game a lot easier. If players are struggling with Dark Souls, you can effectively enable Dark Souls' version of easy mode by summoning other players, using high poise sets. That's a lot more interesting to me than picking easy mode from a game option, isn't it? Poise itself was removed from subsequent titles, at least in its Dark Souls 1 form. In the second Dark Souls, it rather determined if you would be able to continue your attack without being interrupted, or if not attacking, whether you would be fully staggered or light staggered, wherein you can still move and perform actions just at a reduced speed. Whereas hyper armor, the style of poise present in Dark Souls 1, was only there on certain weapons and attacks. And unlike the first game, you would increase poise through your stats. It would primarily come from armor, of course, but you could increase it through stats as a secondary way. In general, it was a lot less effective, but more balanced, more nuanced. In Dark Souls 3, meanwhile, it was largely relegated to how effective your hyper armor was during attacks. There was a big hoo-ha back at launch because people were able to turn poise on through adjusting game files, and people were wondering, is poise working properly? Is it working at all? It was eventually revealed ostensibly that it was working fine, and the version that you could turn on was not intended for players but more so for enemies, effectively allowing enemies to have a Dark Souls 1 style of poise while players were stuck with the inferior version. Which was a weird way of doing it and not something I was a huge fan of. Enemies should obey the same rules as the players, and in Dark Souls 2 and 3, in particular, enemies began breaking player set rules. So which game has the best poise system? Was poise too overpowered in the first game? And if so, does that matter? In my opinion, the best solution for a future title would be to tie mobility into poise. For example, if you have high poise, you would automatically be unable to min-max and also work it so you're fast rolling. There would be thresholds where if you have X poise, you have a Y roll. I like how poise worked in the first game. Whilst it was like an easy mode for some people, I don't really see the problem with that. I don't have an issue with games having an easy mode. And as mentioned, the easy mode in Dark Souls was allowing you to grind and get stronger items. I think the best solution is just to have poise and mobility, as mentioned, be connected so that you can't have super high poise and also be fast rolling. If you have tier S poise, you have tier D mobility. That way you enable all levels of play, from light through heavy armor, right? Of course it presents its own set of problems, but that's what you balance around. And how will all of this work in future titles, I wonder? Bloodborne had no real poise system per se, but you could break or heavy stagger some enemies, leading to powerful attacks. And Sekiro took this one step further with the posture gauge, which in theory works a lot like a combination between stamina and poise. Once you broke an enemy's posture through repeated attacks, parries and the like, it would leave them open to a devastating attack. How could this evolution work in Elden Ring, which at time of writing has gone more than a year since the announcement without a single detail? I like the idea of having slightly limb-based combat and destruction. For example, once you break an enemy's poise or posture, perhaps you can remove or cripple one of their limbs with a special attack. And this posture would be determined by their poise and level of armor. Likewise, the player character should be able to risk having lower poise and armor but higher mobility and the like. If there is one thing I would love to see in Elden Ring, it is a return to all levels of armor and all weapons being viable. The light and speedy style of game that we've had since Bloodborne, through Dark Souls 3 and so on, is, well, it's not bad, but to me it somewhat goes against what made Dark Souls so interesting to me in the first place. Methodical pacing where stamina usage and positioning were important, more so than just R1 spam forever, because stamina and positioning, their importance is lessened when you're able to backflip 20 times in a row, you know? But those options should certainly remain in the game. Of course, a thief archetype should be zipping around, whereas the knight should be slower, but able to take more hits. That is, after all, the point of armor. So I'd like to see poise return in some form in a future title, just with a few changes to make it less of a game-dominating stat. What do you think? Let me know down in the comments, and until next time, thank you so much for watching. Ciao.